我那个学签续了，上周，要不我不续，他这个那个
Tell me when it's time. What time is it? Why is your computer always 30 seconds faster? Yeah. You're like, started early out in your
昨天终于做了一个 PPT， 不是 presentation 做完了 ，negotiation。
So is anybody here? This is the first class you've come to?
元气大伤。
That's my little joke.
你们那边的房子租出去了？有放上网
What？ time is it?
还没呢，拿五。我放上网上，然后就得给我打电话，然后就发短信，我哪有公里？
机票订了吗？
订完了，
几号
？What's in there?
15号。
Did you buy chips from Subway?
25号。
What? Cookies?
25号，那你不跟那个网友一起吗？
嗯，对。我老公没有驾照，送不了我。
对，你就得那啥，我也是订的沙头。
It must be time now.
That's like
然后你几号回啊？
6月几？
啊，咱俩
So y'all got that? Because that'll be on the
6
exam.
月几？你哦对，
你6月多少啊
Uh-oh.
22了，22。
我23。
That's my little alarm. I don't
你
get
为
phone
啥
calls.？
那你是订的往返呗？对。
That's how come I can have $100 a year cell phone contract.
往返，只有800吧。
哎，那挺划算呀。
A year?
你就
I'm a
这几
year.
天订的
$100
800
a year.
一个人往返800。
Okay.
就这几天订的呗。
I have to wait?
Yes, I'm late today.
So we have to wait because you're late?
Yes, please.
I will take a... Okay. I was just mentioning that if this is the first class you've attended, you're screwed. Don't even... Right? You're in so much trouble. Right? You can't possibly imagine it. I want to do two things tonight. And I'm probably going to do a little bit of a sandwich approach. Yeah, so we're going to do one thing, then we're going to do another thing, and then we're going to come back to the first thing. So the first thing I want to do before we do anything else is give you an opportunity to ask any questions about anything. And this should be, if there's something that we've covered in this course that you don't understand, and you're going, this better not be on the exam because I just don't understand it. It's probably on the exam. So you should fix that now. So and I've taught long enough to know that there's going to be some of you out there that don't even know what you don't understand yet. Because you haven't really started to learn the material. That could lead to bad things. But if you do, if there's something, and I kind of drew a little thing up here for your educational amusement here, and we can walk through, and if there's anything that you don't understand, especially if there's something you go, I don't understand what the test is for that, now would be a good time. Yes?
Consensus.
Yeah.
Do I have to have the three parts of consensus to have consensus, or just one is enough?
No, you're confusing two concepts. Can I help you with that?
Yes, please.
Okay. So her question is about the three parts of consensus. Consensus doesn't have three parts. Offers have three parts. So consensus deals with the fact that what the person has accepted has to be what the other person offered. And that's the test. Is what was offered the same as what was accepted? Are you with me on that so far? So, in order for you to understand that, you also have to understand a lot about offers. And I'm not going to explain it all again, but the question is what was offered the same as what was accepted? You have to know that offers have three parts because it can impact on your answer. Is what was offered the same as what was accepted? And how it impacts on your answer is we have what is stated. That is, will you buy this chalk for $1? That's stated. We have what's obviously meant. If it were not for this rule, we would have many more situations in which there wouldn't be consensus or people would try to prove there is a consensus. So, if I thought it was chocolate flavored and you thought it was vanilla flavored, and you're accepting it because you thought it was vanilla flavored, but I thought it was chocolate flavored, do we have a lack of consensus because I was offering a chocolate and you were accepting a vanilla? Except for we won't ever have that, right? Because it's a piece of chalk. How many people would say, obviously, it's neither? Everyone would. So, if we just look at what's in our heads, that's just this part. But this part will fix any understandings that we have and say we both agreed to what was obvious. So it helps you answer the question, which is what was offered the same as what was accepted? When we go down to the third part here, you can see this happening again. If you can understand the overview, folks, and I don't mind spending a tiny bit of time here because I know that this is one of the more difficult areas, okay? So, the example I used was, let's say that I asked you to meet at dinner time in a written contract, and you thought it meant what time?
6 p.m.
And I thought it meant noon. Let's go back to test about consensus. I was offering noon, you were accepting 6. Right? So is what was offered, noon, the same as what was accepted, 6? So if it weren't for this rule, we would get to the point where there'd be no consensus. But the rule will fix it. It puts it back in. And that's what all three of these basically do. They put it back in. So this will create consensus where people are thinking different things, including when one of them or both of them are thinking things that are unobvious. This, for written contracts, will fix it. If you didn't know about these, you would come to wrong conclusions some of the time about whether what was offered was the same as what was accepted. So they're not parts of consensus, they're parts of offers. And they impact on what the offer means. And they, especially these last ones, they often would create consensus because the court says you agreed to that. And you offered that. And then we ask the question, is what was offered the same as what was accepted? The court said, yeah, it was obvious. Then you offered it and you accepted it. So the test for consensus is, and it still is what was offered the same as what was accepted. But to answer that, you often have to understand how offers work. And how the court interprets offers and how they impose meaning on both sides based on what you refer to as the three parts. Okay? So the test is still the same, but you do have to understand offers to answer that. It's the same thing as understanding how long they last, because, when it dies, if I said I'm offered to sell this chalk for you for $1, no, I changed my mind, I'm not going to, and you say accept, and you ask the question, is what was offered the same as what was accepted? Your answer is going to be, there is no offer, because my withdrawal killed that offer. So you have to understand that. You can't just look at the test and not know anything else about it, because you won't be able to deal properly with facts without understanding this whole area. And we did spend several hours on this, okay, because it involves so much. Even though the test is simple, the understanding of how offers works gets more complicated. Okay. Do I have, are you clear?
Yes.
Good, thank you. That's good. What else?
Can you explain duty to mitigate more?
Yes. So I'm just going to point out for people who may not be following the bouncing ball where we are. This is dealt with underneath here, and it would actually be here. So how do we get to this point? We have to have all elements, right? Because there has to be a contract before we even deal with that. Okay? And we either have to have no flaws or a situation in which a person chooses not to use the flaw. And we have to have, it was the obligations that you would find in that offer were not done, so it wasn't performed. And it wasn't discharged by other means, through one of these. And that means it was breached. So, if we draw a contract between two people, which there's one person, there's the other, here's the contract, okay? One of them hasn't done what they're supposed to do. They've breached. I'm going to give this visually, okay? All right. So which one breached? You get to pick. Is it A or B?
A.
A. Bad A. Okay. So A is the bad one here. That's supposed to be the devil, not a pig. Although it does look more like a pig now that I finish it. Okay. So they're the bad ones. Okay. So we'll give them a little pitchfork. Okay. So we got two sides in the contract. This person did something wrong. They can be sued. The duty to mitigate says, even though B has the right to sue A, and B has a loss, B can't just sit back in their easy chair and go back to watching soap operas and let that loss roll in. They can't just say, well, this is going to cost A $1 million because it's super expensive. All right, so that's how much they... B has to take reasonable steps to reduce that loss. And sometimes when they take reasonable steps, that loss can be reduced to zero. Because the way that financial loss is calculated is the amount of money it would take to put the person back in the same position they would have been in if the contract had been performed. And I'm just going to go back to the example because it works for me and I think it's fairly clear. If you don't deliver sugar to Coca-Cola, they're going to be out millions of dollars. They can't just sit back and say, well, you didn't show up. We're going to sue you for millions of bucks. They have to take reasonable steps. And that would be find someone else. And if they pick up the phone and someone could get that sugar there right away, like within minutes of when the other one was supposed to be delivered, at the same price, Coca-Cola has no loss. And they have to take reasonable steps, which is going to be, at the very least, phone another supplier or two. That's what the duty to mitigate does.
So unless they have to pay more for the sugar, then they can't sue for loss?
There are several situations that could arise, okay? If they do nothing, let's say that the loss is going to be $1.1 million. If they call someone else and they get the sugar at a slightly higher price, that loss might be reduced to $10,000. The way that mitigation works is if B sued A for the 1.1 million, this bad person would show all you had to have done was pick up the phone, and you could have got this loss down to 10,000. Even if B did nothing and there was this loss. A did nothing and there was this loss. If they can show that you could have taken steps to reduce it, reasonable steps, and you didn't, and you had this loss, the court will only award that amount of money. And it could be you can phone and get it there with no loss to you, and it's going to cost the same. So you could have loss reduced to zero by mitigation. In which case, you wouldn't sue. Because you actually didn't have a loss. So if you pick up the phone and sugar was going to be $1 a pound, and there was 10,000 pounds, and you pick it up and they go, we can get it to you for $1.10 a pound, or $2 a pound, I'm doing my math in my head here, then that's a $10,000 loss you could sue for. But if you phone them and they go, we can get it to you for the same price, then your loss is nothing. Unless there's some loss in delay, but don't get hung up on that. In that case, you wouldn't sue, because what did you lose? You can have breach without loss. I'm going to give you one more, okay? Just so you don't have a commercial example, okay? Let's just say that I was going to sell her this computer. For how much? What's it worth? $200. Okay? I'm going to sell it. And she goes, okay, but you got to have it at 6:30 because I've got to do something and it's going to make me $300. So I need that computer at 6:30. Okay? And I breached the contract. So she goes down to the bookstore and she finds this exact computer for $200, brand new now. And she can do that, and she's got it by 6:30. What's her loss? Nothing. Does she have to go down to the bookstore? Yes. Unless it's not open. But, you know, if it's a few minutes or a bit of time, they have to. And some people say, well, it's not fair, because, you know what? She did nothing wrong. Well, that's not the way it works, though. Because the court won't let you just sit back in your easy chair eating chocolates and be too fat to get out of it. Right? They make you do a few steps to fix it. We could argue all day about how far that goes, what's reasonable, what isn't. But I would just want you to understand the concept. Reasonable steps. Anything else? Okay, I'm not going to let you do this. If you don't have a question right now, put up your hand. If you don't have a question, put up your hand. Do you have a question? Do you have a question? Okay, wait, hold that. I'm going to come back to you, man. The rest of you, if you don't have a question, put up your hand. You do not have a question. Do you have a question? Yes. See? This works. Okay. Do you have a question there?
Later, okay?
Later? You want to ask it later? No, ask it now. What if somebody else had the question and they didn't even know it? But try. What's it about? Okay, take a moment. I'm going to give you a second chance at the end of class, but not after class. After we do the case study. Okay, try and get yourself organized. You good with that? Do you have one too? No? What do you mean no, actually? Endings.
Discharged by other means for frustration.
Yes? Would you like me to explain that? The task, which is really what you're asking. So he's asking me about frustration. What's the task? The test is impossible to perform through no fault of either side. Impossible to perform. Did I explain that to you before at all? Did I? In class, that's where I explain things. Did I? How many of you knew that? Okay, good. I just want to make sure that I've covered it. Sometimes when I've probably taught this course well over 100 times. Sometimes I get muddled about what I've taught whom. Okay? So, and I sometimes realize that when I give you an exam and no one can answer a question, then I've got to remove that question from your test. That's what happens, by the way. I don't just say, oh, well, it sucks to be you. I deal with it appropriately. Have I answered your question?
Can you give me an example?
Yeah. Let's say I'm going to sell you a pie. Do you like pie?
Not really.
Well, then pick something.
Okay, pie.
All right. So you want me to bake you a nice pie, and you're going to get... How much you need to give me for that pie?
$10.
Okay, that's fair, because you don't really like it. And I bake you a nice pie, and I put it on the windowsill, and a monkey grabs the pie and runs off with it. Can I give you the pie? Why not?
Monkey, take it away.
Would you agree that performing of that contract with that pie is impossible? Here's the question. Is it my fault?
Maybe.
No, it's not my fault. You know why? I've never seen a monkey in Canada. Where did the monkey come from? Right? I just put it out on my windowsill. There's not monkeys. And there's a monkey took off with my pie. That may not be the best example, but it's trying to get you to understand there are two parts. First of all, it's impossible to perform. Okay? Second of all, no fault of either side. Generally speaking, the inability to pay is never considered to be impossible. If you made a promise to pay and then you got laid off of your job, you can't say, well, I don't have my job, so I guess I can't do it. It's impossible. Okay? It doesn't work like that. But if something happens to the subject matter of a contract in a way that there's no way to fix it, that's impossible to perform. Sometimes students are asking for certainty, especially those of you up there that are very concrete. You've got to recognize in this course, it's not about the answer. It's about the process and the question, which is the test. So, primarily what I'm looking for, if you came to a situation where you felt it could possibly be argued that it was frustration, that I see you write down, the test is it impossible to perform through no fault of either side? And then I just look at your answer and see whether it makes sense. I'm going to tell you this again, because it is very important. If you do not have this in your notes in bold, you should put it there. On the exam, everything in contracts has a test, and you have to write the test down. Those instructions are given to you on the front page, but I know some of you don't think that instructions are important. Right? So I'm telling it to you verbally now so that you don't screw that up and not write those down. There are often marks simply for asking the right question. So you need to. Want to have answered your question?
Yes.
Anybody else have a question? Oh, got two. Rock, paper, scissors? Just go ahead.
I just wanted to know, for the rules of interpreting a written contract, how do they come into play as a result of the case study?
That's a chicken and an egg problem. I need you to look at this a slightly different way. I'm going to try something I haven't done before, okay? You have to kind of look at these concepts sort of like this. They're like a bridge, okay? And here's the question. If you have to get to the house, do you have to go over the bridge?
Is there a lake under the bridge?
No. How do you tell? You got to know what the whole scene is like. You can't do it with that, right? Because if the river, that's the river. Did you notice that was a river? That was a freaking river, okay? You know, goes like this. Then what do you got to do? You got to use the bridge. But if the river goes like this, do you have to go over the bridge to get to the house? So the law is kind of like steps along the path between the problem and the solution. Okay? And that's why I haven't checked this enough to know that it's absolutely true, but it basically says you got to know what the dispute is about, and do we have to go over the bridge to solve the dispute? So you can't determine, before you read facts, which laws are being pulled in. We're going to see that in this next case study. So you can't tell whether or not it's in play without knowing what the facts are. So when do you use it? When you need to go over the bridge to get to the solution. So this is true of all of this stuff, is that when do you use flaws? Well, do you use them if there's no facts to support them? Can you use them if there's no facts to support them? No. So when do you use them? Well, you use them when there's facts to support them, and they're needed. They would be needed to resolve the dispute. And this is one of the reasons why your contracts exam is generally fairly pointed. In other words, we deal with this area, this area, this. You don't deal with it all at once. Okay, can you repeat your question?
I was asking, what do these, different things, if you can find that there's ambiguity in a written contract, is that, what does that mean for the contract? Does that mean there's, Is it breach or? what's
No,
that?
it's interpreted. These things have meaning. Unfair surprise says clauses that are harsh or excessive or unusual. What happens to them?
Must be.
They have to be specifically pointed out. If they're not, what happens?
They're removed.
So if it's removed from the contract, can you be sued for breaching it when it's not there? So do you want it removed? Well, it depends. Right? Maybe you don't want it removed. What about ambiguity? What's it do? It puts meaning where the people didn't have meaning. And then, by knowing what the contract is interpreted as saying, we can assess breach. So you can't say, does that result in breach? You can't assess breach without facts. So, if I said, we buy this chalk for $1, right? And you said, fine. And then you gave me the $1 and I gave you the chalk. Well, what's the if there was ambiguity in a written contract, what would we use it for? Nothing, right? There's no breach. But if the fight is about what does the contract mean, then we need this rule. This is the bridge that you have to go over to get to the answer. So, you cannot look at this in isolation. You can't look at any of these concepts. And I'm going to show you this again. Let's say I say, I am giving you no facts at all, about an agreement. Okay? So, that's all it says. Tell me which of these concepts you would have to use. The answer is, there's no way to answer that question. Is this important? Is this important? Is this important? You have to understand what these mean and be able to connect them where they need to be connected to facts. And this is what the case studies do. They're going to show you this. Okay, so sometimes the rule's useless. It has nothing to do with anything in the fact situation. It's there, it exists, you can find it in a book, but the court would not walk along that path to get to the result, because it's not a rule that has anything to do with sorting out disputes. So these are rules for saying what the contract is. Okay? And this is where the obligations are found. And that's important because it allows us to assess performance. And if there's no performance, it tells us that it's breached. So we can't analyze breach. And again, if I said Jane and Mary made a contract, was it breached? What? Of course you can't know. And it'd be worse if I said Jane and Mary made an agreement. Was it breached? You don't even know if there's a contract, right? So, you cannot look at these concepts in isolation of the facts. And this is why the exam is open book. It's not about, have you memorized those things? It's about, can you take them and use them properly when facts are presented in front of you? Because what I'm training you to do is be able to take these concepts and use them when facts are presented in front of you. The difference is, I'm going to write out fake facts. You're going to go and deal with real facts. You will know what the facts are. You'll be able to figure out what's happened. And you'll be able to assess what you know from this. And there would never be a situation where out in the real world you had a contractual dispute and somebody said, you can't look up anything to sort it out. And that's why I give Let's Open Book, because in the real world, you'd be able to get this information. But you can't analyze things in the absence of facts. You can't say what they mean until you have facts. And that's why the case studies we're going to do today are so important. So I'm going to try to answer your question. These are about determining what the obligations under a contract are. And they are used to analyze performance or breach. This is the kind of best I can do. Does that help? Go ahead.
For the parole evidence rule and the exceptions, where would you, like, I know that there's no steps, like, around everything, but where would you kind of place it, like, look for it? Like, under the endings or the remedies? Or, like, where would you put it so that if you were looking for it, it would kind of, like, flow with the rest of the information?
I keep getting the same, this is the same question, folks, over and over again. Where does it go? How does it fit? What's the thing? It depends. Do you even need it? Is it part of the path between where you are and where you have to be? There's no way for you to tell that in absence. Parole evidence rule is a rule of evidence. It's about what you can prove. And it ties with this because that's how the court will determine your obligations. All of the obligations are always only in the offer. But it is the offer as legally defined, not just what is stated. It's this plus this plus this. So here it's saying the court will determine what you have to do when there's a written document by looking at the written document. And they will not allow you to testify about what is stated. So, where does it go? It may go nowhere. If there's not a written document, where do you put it? Nowhere. Right? But if they have a fight, and there was a verbal agreement, an attempt to change the agreement, then you would come in at some point and say, the parole evidence rule would prevent this agreement from being proved, and therefore the judge would look at this. When I mark your exam, I don't look at where it is most of the time. It's not about where it is. So if you put it in a spot that I wouldn't have, but you've dealt with it, I move answers all over the contracts exam. If you didn't know that that was what it was about, you may lose a tiny bit. But if you know what the rule is, and you just stuck it somewhere, because sometimes the fact that you haven't dealt with it here means you don't completely understand that it needs to be there. Okay? So what happens is, but you dealt with it somewhere else. So now I say, you should have dealt with it here, but you knew the answer. So if it was worth 3 marks, I might give you 2.5. You'll get the bulk of the marks because you knew it. You are likely to find that the exam is more straightforward than you may be expecting in that regard, in terms of structure. Okay, I'm going to tell you something now. Okay, this is real important. Okay, if anyone wants marks, this is kind of important. You're going to see that the exam kind of has this particular format. You're given a case study and you're asked very straightforward questions. Bang, 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 bang. And then at about halfway through the exam, it says, okay, I am going to change one fact at a time, so to speak. In other words, if this happens, what is the rule? And then it says, okay, forget about that one. In other words, you're not supposed to keep on going with that first presumption when you get on. Let's change this, and what happens? Do you understand? So we have our sort of more linear format, and then I start throwing changes to individual changes. They're not collective, and it says that. The answers from one are not to be used for the answer to the next one. These are supposed to be individual changes through, okay? So I'm going to go, okay, What if I change this? One of the things that I found is that students will often be able to deal reasonably well till about that halfway point. And then they shit the bed. They just fall apart. And it's amazing how often I'll get marks, wrong on that last bit. You don't understand what it's about, and therefore your answer's wrong. So I've never told classes that before. You're the first ones I've ever told this to. I don't know if that's going to help you. If you don't understand it, telling you that you're likely to screw up the second half, if you're going to screw up anything, it'll probably be on the second half of the test. Maybe be more careful. I don't know what the answer is. If you don't get it, I don't know why you do that.
So then on those questions in the second half, would you be asking us like just a simple different change in the study itself? So would we have to go start from the beginning again and look through all of the 4 elements and then go and continue that way?
It's asking you to deal with the issue that is raised by that change.
Okay, and then how it would affect the ending?
Okay? So, one of the biggest frustrations for me, and probably for you too, is that I regularly on a contracts exam have people who walk out and they think they did really well, and then they get their mark and they're kind of surprised. This happens a lot. And it has to do with basic psychological thing called confirmation bias, where you think that if you've written down an answer, you've written it down because it's correct. So not very many of you say, I think I'm going to write down complete crap for the every second question, and we'll see if I pass or not. Right? You don't do that. You don't purposely write down wrong answers on an exam unless you've got something deeply, deeply wrong with you. Okay? So, in which case, I'm going to be checking my back seat before I drive away at night after teaching you, because there's something deeply, deeply wrong with you. So, every answer you think is right. And you also think it's complete. But it isn't. And when I sit down with those people afterwards, and I do on occasion, and they go, how did I go so terribly wrong? I thought I did really well. And I said, well, yeah. Oh, yeah. They get it. They just didn't. Like, it's not like we have a disagreement. They know, oh, God, that is wrong. Oh, God, that is wrong. Right? Sorry. And although I'm trying to have you people understand that you've got to get this stuff. It's got to be easy and free-flowing and clear. And then if it is, when you're presented with a fact situation, you got to go, there it is. I know what it is. There it is. I know what it is. It's kind of like finding Waldo. You know, every case question is, can you find Waldo? There he is. I know what Waldo looks like, right? But you got to know there's a bunch of different Waldos. And you got to be able to identify them all. I would say that the average mark is probably, out of 40, it's probably around 26. And I have no idea how you're going to do. And it doesn't matter what the average mark is. What matters is what your mark is. Right? It doesn't matter what the average mark is. Yeah?
How often do you have a perfect test?
How long do you have to write it?
No, how often do you have a perfect score? Once every 5 years, ever?
I can't remember one.
So have you seen a 39 or a 38?
Yeah, I've seen 38s out of 40. Yeah. They happen. Getting above 32 is a good mark on this test. I sometimes mark it on a curve. Sometimes mark it at a 37. Or is that the other test? That might be my Law 2 class. That's also a nasty test, the exam. So, how many of you are taking Law 2? Yeah.
Not now.
Yeah. How many of you were taking Law 2? All right, before I said that. Yeah. It's got 3 assignments on it, which is very different. So half your marks are known going in, and then there's this 50% exam, and it's got some challenging questions on it. Some of them are easy, some of them are challenging. All right, go.
Invitation to treat.
Yeah.
Just so the way I've got the notes here. At the bottom, I put unilateral contract.
Completely different concepts.
Okay, that's what I want to clarify.